So, after hundreds of conversations on this podcast, 7+ years talking with people from all around the world and fielding questions from our listeners across dozens and dozens of countries, and the growth that I've experienced myself, and all of the learning opportunities that I've had the chance to be a part of, I've come to the realization that we've largely been thinking about endurance wrong. We think about endurance, the ability to endure. And I'm not talking about endurance purely through the lens of the physical capacity, but we think about the ability to endure through the lens of equating that with pain, with pushing harder, going longer, going farther, grinding through something difficult, pushing ourselves past our comfort zone, unlocking something on the other side of this bridge that we have to build, this thing that we have to get over. And again, that primarily is equated with pain, with suffering, with discomfort. And I think that there is certainly an inherent part of that. But the more I think about it, and again, the more that I've experienced this or recognized this in my own growth journey, the more I observe high performers across all areas of life. So physical, relationship, business/career, wherever individuals are focused on high performance, I don't think that that's actually what endurance is. I don't think that it is solely a equation that has to involve pain and discomfort. I don't think that it is also an inherent relationship or is in relationship with, again, pushing harder, going longer, pain, discomfort, suffering. And so I think there's an opportunity to broaden the lens here. We've talked about these things in different capacities and different ways on different episodes of this show, but I found myself really wanting to distill what is this thing of endurance? What is this thing that we're striving for? Why is it something that we, I think, know is important? I think if you asked anyone if the ability to endure is something that is valuable, I think that they would say yes. But I also have come to understand that our definition around that specific topic, I believe, has a tendency to be skewed. And so let's broaden the lens here. And I know that, again, as I've talked to hundreds of high performers, and well, thousands really, if we take into account my personal work and where I spend time outside of this podcast, endurance shows up in lots of different places. We know that it shows up in business, like I mentioned. So building something over years and years. I've talked a lot about expanding our time horizons. We know that it shows up in relationships, staying committed through hard seasons, not giving up when that might be the easiest solution. We know that it shows up in our health and our consistent habits and working on sustainability, on defining what success actually looks and feels like in our bodies and related to our health, knowing what healthy actually means for us outside of just our physical capabilities. We know that it shows up in leadership, both how we lead ourselves and how we lead those around us, and how we show up under pressure. And with all this in mind, I believe that, very simply, endurance isn't about how much or how hard you can push. It's about how long you can stay aligned. Now, I arrived on that definition very consciously and with a lot of critical thought. And so, with that, let me define what aligned looks like, because that's the key language shift. Again, I'm going to give you what I think an upgraded definition of endurance is. Endurance isn't about how much you can push, it is about how long you can stay aligned. With that, we need to define what aligned is. And I think aligned is, among other things, it is being aligned with your values. I believe that it is being aligned with who you said you'd become, the promises that you made to yourself. And I think it's being aligned with the standard that you hold yourself to, not letting yourself slip and not uphold the promises and the standards that you've built for yourself when things get challenging. And so I believe that endurance ultimately is about alignment over time. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with effort, with the intensity of that effort, with how hard or brutal it is, what a slog it is. I think that, again, very simply put, endurance is alignment over time. Now, there are a lot of things, like I mentioned earlier, and like I've come to realize, and I've certainly been in this camp. I think that I've come through all stages of endurance and all different types of identities that I could have wrapped up in that. But I do think that we get endurance wrong as a whole. And I want to define or highlight a few areas that I think that we tend to muddy the waters when it comes to endurance, or to shift our perspective in a way that might not be particularly helpful. So firstly, we equate endurance with intensity. We think that endurance is going all in. We think endurance is pushing ourselves or the scenario or even those around us to the limit. We think that endurance is, quote unquote, no days off. And the reality of it is that intensity is unsustainable. Now, bouts of intensity, certainly intensity with a critical eye towards sustainability, with a critical eye towards what success actually looks and feels like, and what we want that end result to be, and how we define those things. Certainly intensity plays a role. But again, intensity with the intention of always being intense, we know that that is not the reality. We know that the reality of the situation is intensity is unsustainable. And so that can't equal endurance. Inherently, there is a rift in the relationship between endurance and intensity, that if endurance is alignment over long periods of time, then we know that intensity can't be wrapped up in that equation. We also know that the reality is that intensity burns people out. And so that when we equate endurance with intensity, we, again, can see that that is inherently flawed, because burnout doesn't yield intensity. Or I'm sorry, burnout doesn't yield endurance. It is, again, by nature, a flawed component of endurance, because we need to expand the time horizon. There is a length or a time-based component to endurance. And so by nature, intensity largely can't be involved, not at scale. We also think that endurance equals motivation. So we've taken for granted, I think, or we make a broad stroke where people rely on feeling good to muster or summon the ability to endure. People look for inspiration to find endurance or to continue to endure. People also wait to be in the mood, in quotes. And we don't often get the choice. Now we can opt into things that are hard, which require endurance. But again, if we zoom out and take a more overarching, life focused version of endurance, again, endurance being staying aligned for long periods of time, then being in the mood doesn't have anything to do with it. Because it's part of our life. It's part of who we are. It's part of how we are required to show up. And so the reality is that motivation is inconsistent. Sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't. But again, endurance and the need to endure is part of the human experience. And so if we wait around for motivation, there's going to be inherent gaps in how we show up in those within endurance. We also know that the reality is that motivation disappears when things get hard. We don't tend to get more motivated the more pressure we have on us. Motivation tends to rise when all things are kind of in alignment, when things are feeling a little more in flow. And so again, as part of one of the misconceptions, I think that equating endurance and motivation is flawed. Lastly, endurance equals suffering. I alluded to this and talked about this at the onset, but people romanticize, we all do it, we romanticize pain and the grind and the struggle and insert whatever language you've heard. We've all heard it ad nauseum. We've been beaten over the head with it that the only way to do anything, to get ahead, to be fit, to build the business, to have the relationship, to do the whatever, is to suffer. And so again, we say that endurance equals suffering, and then we romanticize the parts of that are hard. Here's the reality, is that you can work really hard in the wrong direction for a really long time. So hard work does not mean productivity. It doesn't mean success. It doesn't mean that you're accomplishing your goals. You can be in pain. You can grind, you can struggle, you can suffer. There's nothing that says that has to equal the success that you want, that it has to equal you becoming the person that you want on the other side of that. We know that suffering without direction leads to burnout. You just continue to grind and suffer, and there's no clear direction. You don't understand why you're doing that, and you don't recognize that doing that forever is not sustainable. Again, intensity and endurance are not in the same equation. We have to understand that suffering without direction leads to burnout. We also need to understand that endurance isn't about punishment. It's about continuation. Again, the nature of that is that it is time-bound. It is long. And it might just be, this season, but it's a longer season than we probably thought. It might be for this year, and then we can extend that out to our lifetime. How do we continue to stay aligned for the duration? For every day that we have the opportunity to show up and give our best and make an impact on the world. And so most people don't fail because they can't go hard. People going hard, people showing up with intensity is not the issue that I've found. I think that we have a tendency to craft a narrative where that's not the case. People aren't willing to do the work. People aren't willing to go hard. They're not willing to deliver the level of intensity required. But in my experience, that's largely not the case. Most people don't fail because they can't go hard. They fail because they can't stay consistent when it's no longer exciting. When all of these things stack and they're over the pain and they're lost the motivation and they've gone too intense for too long and it's just burned them out. They fail because they can't stay in that place because, again, our definition and the equation around how we pursue endurance is flawed. And so we set ourselves up for failure out of the gate. And so, again, it's not for lack of effort. It's not for lack of wanting. It's not for lack of drive. It's actually the opposite. It's because we can't sustain those things and we don't understand how to stay in alignment for long periods of time. And so, again, I'll reiterate, endurance isn't about how hard you can go. It's about how long you can stay. The people that stay are the people that win, right? You have to be in the game to win the game. And so we need to figure this out. We need to not sprint for 6 months and then be so trash that we can't stay in the game, because we don't get a chance to play. Right? If you're burnt out, if you're injured, if you're too tired, if you're disconnected, if you've lost sight of why it even matters to begin with, then endurance is no longer on the table and you're no longer in the game. And so all of your effort up front was all for naught. And that's a shame, because I think we all deserve the opportunity to continue to stay in the game and continue to make an impact. All right. So now let's talk about, I think there's layers of endurance, right? I think this is nuanced. The thrust of this conversation is that we need to open up the conversation. We need to use more language around endurance. And I think there's 3 layers to it, made simply. First layer is there is physical endurance. To be able to stay in the game, to continue to play the proverbial game, there is a physical component of that. We got to get up every day. We got to do the thing. We have to exert ourselves, and there is physical energy there. So this is what people see. This is, I don't think any of us are going to fail or struggle to connect endurance with the physical aspect. So this is the workouts. This is the races. This is the outcome-based goals. This is the long days. This is the output after you've put in the work and now there's something to show for it. It's also measurable. So this is the thing that's a little sexier because it's something that we can grasp. It's miles. It's hours worked, hours put in, hours trained, hours spent developing skills and tools and connections so that I can do this thing. It's weight. It's if you're on the physical side, this is what I look like. This is my body composition. I lost some weight. I gained some weight. I'm molding myself because of the effort that I'm putting in, because of the physical input. I now look different. It's performance metrics, pace, power, heart rate, HRV, sleep. The list goes on. We are inundated with performance metrics, and those are fine. I'm not saying those are bad, but this is an important part, but it's limited. And you can be physically strong and still lack endurance in all other areas of your life. And so the physical piece is important. I do think being physically fit allows us to endure. If we have a body that allows us access to opportunities, that allows us the energy to deploy our brain power and our ideas and to connect with people, that's important. If you don't have the physical ability to go out in the world and day after day continue to do the thing, then again, you get taken out of the game prematurely. So the physical piece is important, but this is where, a lot of times it stops. We think about endurance, boom, physical. But let me reiterate, you can be physically strong, you can be physically fit, you can be physically capable, and still lack endurance in all areas of your life. All right, second layer. Now we're going to go a little deeper. Second layer of endurance. We have mental and emotional endurance. So I talked about this in different ways in some previous podcasts over the winter. If you want to go a little deeper into this, go back to some podcasts in December and January. But this is where things really start to break down. The physical piece is pretty straightforward. And again, it's trackable. So it's something we can share and we can talk about and we can see, but now it starts to get a little further away from us. So our mental and emotional endurance includes several different things. It includes our self-talk. It includes our internal narrative, our internal dialogue, how we talk to ourselves, and then ultimately how we feel about ourselves. It includes our ability to regulate stress and the impact that we let that stress have on us. It includes our ability to respond to setbacks. And these are smaller points. Now they're massive in terms of their impact, but it's hard to nail them down every single day because we have to look for them. This is where we would have to work the muscle. And this is why I said this is where things usually start to break down, is because it's easy to work the muscle on the physical side. I can show up and exercise. I can show up to my office and work long hours. I can schedule more meetings. I can do the outcome externally focused things. That's easy to sink my teeth into. Now I got to get real with myself. I got to work on how I talk to myself, how I build my confidence, how I feel day in and day out. I got to regulate my stress. I got to build a toolbox that allows me to do that. I got to ride the wave inevitably when things get thrown at me. How do I respond to setbacks? And that's more challenging. So examples of that are vast. Let me give you a few. Sticking to a plan when results are slow. How do I respond when I can't see results, but I know I'm going to continue to stick with it? Right? This is where, again, we need that emotional regulation. We need that mental and emotional endurance because there's no outcome yet. We don't spiral when things go wrong. We regulate our emotions. We can be mad about that. We can be frustrated. We can be sad. But it's an input. We take ownership. We have full autonomy over how we show up and how we deploy our endurance. And we can stay composed under pressure. Again, we don't let those external inputs sway us.